welcome to Tell Muses, a podcast from storytellers for storytellers with storytellers, all about the wonderful art of oral storytelling and all about stories. Today, Despina and I are really excited to welcome on the podcast the wonderful Rosalind Bach. So, welcome, Rosalind, and thank you for being here with us.
Welcome.
Thanks very much for having me. Thank you. It's a pleasure.
So, Rosalind, we normally start these interviews by asking our muse, our guest teller, could you tell a few things about who Rosalind Bach is?
Well, what can I say? I've been on the stage since I was 6. I've been writing songs since I was 8. I guess I've always in one way or another been a storyteller, writing and reading aloud and doing voiceovers and things like that all my life. But the storytelling in the form that we do it now and the kind of shows I do now, that started at the beginning of COVID, when my brother, Jason Buck, storyteller, was already working live and asked if I'd like to do a show with him at lunchtime, the stories for children. So I started out actually by reading Winnie the Pooh and Wind in the Willows for him. And then we started doing storytelling evenings together. Apart from being a storyteller, I'm also a literary translator. I translate from Dutch and Flemish to English, occasionally a little bit of German or French, but it's mostly Dutch and Flemish. I work with a lot of Flemish poets. So I translate books, mostly non-fiction, and poetry. Apart from that, actually, the profession of translator basically doesn't really exist any longer. It's been taken over by machine translation, which is actually so good that the only work you get offered is correcting things, and that's not translation. So I just stick to literature. I've just done 2 comic books for Belgium, one for the Osaka World Expo for the Belgian pavilion. That's a comic book about vaccines and medical research. And I did one for a fort in Belgium about the history. It's World War II history, which was pretty interesting, because it was really done from the point of view of both sides. It's not a them and us thing. So it also tells about the lives of the German soldiers, and it's the first use of parachutists in war. So that was pretty interesting. It's a different kind of medium. And then this summer I will be at the Translator's House in Antwerp, working on a book on the Dada movement. That's about. And I also work sometimes as a vegan chef, but that's a completely different thing.
Ooh, yeah, it is very different. So I've always thought that it takes a poet to translate a poet. So are you a poet, Rosalind?
Yes, I do write poetry as well. I've been writing poetry all my life. You can't translate poetry if you can't write it. I've just finished 2 poems for the 55th anniversary of Poetry International by a poet who's notoriously difficult to translate. And this was 2 quite long poems, which are all in rhyming couplets. And as the difference between Dutch and English is Dutch like German, other Germanic languages, the verb comes at the end. So mostly the rhymes have been made with verb conjugations, and I have to find somewhere else within the line to find a rhyme. So it's really taking the line and looking at it, turning it around like a little puzzle, moving bits and synonyms and rhymes, etc. It's quite a complicated process, but it's really satisfying, and it is possible.
Yeah, of course it is possible. Otherwise, we would only have poems in their native languages,
Yeah.
of course. But to me, it is the hardest thing one can try to translate, because there are so many
Elements.
subtle details in poems. That there are, the elements that can very easily get lost in translation. I mean, normal language can get lost in translation, let alone subtler things.
Yeah, because you have to keep the meter, the rhythm of the poem, any rhymes, and try and repeat or compensate somewhere else for any alliteration. And the meaning's got to be the same. I once translated over a long weekend 204 haikus. I think that's probably the most intense thing I've ever done.
Wow. And you also compose music, right? You write your own songs.
I do. I've been singing on stage since I was 6. I had a classical training, and French horn was my first instrument, and guitar second. But I started singing in folk clubs at around about 15, doing mostly my own stuff. And since I've been doing storytelling, um, I tend to specialize in dark themes mostly. So the songs I've been writing to go along with these shows are an incantation or something about the wild hunt or about witches, or it'll be a ghost who's actually the person singing the song.
We had Jason here in a previous episode. Pardon, Simona, I'll just hand it over right back to you. We had Jason here in a previous episode, and he was telling us how you grew up in this kind of not performative exactly, but literary environment where both your parents would kind of give their own shows among friends and the like. Do you have memories of that?
Well, of course, he's 12 years younger than me, so his experience is slightly different from mine, because when I was little, our father was head of the drama department in a teacher training college. And our mother was a music and history teacher, but a trained opera singer. So I saw more of the performative side than he did. She did a lot of operetta. She did a lot of, when I was very small, she did a lot of Gilbert and Sullivan, Mikado, and the Pirates of Penzance, and things like that. And our older brother and I, we were behind the scenes at the college in the lighting box, printing programs and things like that. And my dad taught costume making as well. So, but my mother continued singing opera and operetta for a long time. So he will have seen her doing concerts. I think, yeah, and we did. Well, my first appearance, professional appearance, if you like, I think, was when we did a concert actually at Mick Jagger's house in Richmond, for charity, and it was our parents were doing readings from Dickens, and my mother sang some typical Victorian songs, and I did some Victorian songs, but in different styles, sort of parlour songs rather than like Pretty Little Polly Perkins from Paddington Green, and those kind of street songs. That was when I was 17, and after that I started working in folk clubs and restaurants and things. So Jason, coming along 12 years later, had a slightly different experience. He would have seen them he used to join in puppet shows. They were doing a lot of puppet shows at that time, and he often featured in them as a very tiny person. At Christmas once, they were, I don't know what the show was, but they were doing a show for a creche, and little Jason there stood up and sung, "When Santa got stuck up the chimney, he began to shout." You can imagine this little Jason, who's now, what, 6'4", my little brother.
And Rosalind, I was also thinking, you seem to have this fascination for the Gothic and macabre in common with Jason. So is this something that you discovered together, that you passed down to him, that your parents were fascinated by?
I think it's individual. My mother hated horror. She would try and stop my father from watching horror films, or she would just leave the room, and it would be Dad and me watching, Hammer horror things, black and white. So I got my love from horror probably from my dad. And I would read ghost stories and stuff from a very, very young age. Jason, I'm not sure. I mean, he's more gory than I am, definitely. I mean, he's done a lot of live role playing, including sort of sachets of pig's blood and things like that. And there's very little back and forth between us on stories. When we organise an evening, we discuss when's a good day. Is that around? Is that a special day in the calendar, or shall we do something on? I don't know, well, cats, or we did cats, rats, and mice once, or changelings, or whatever. We pick a theme, and then we go away, and we turn up on the day, and neither of us has heard the other's stories. So, and sometimes it's amazing how they're not the same story, but you can see some kind of common thread through it, even though we've had no discussions about the stories at all.
Yeah, I think we've discussed this extensively, how the synchronicity in stories works is incredible. But I was thinking that when you were describing your mom's hatred towards horror films, it's really weird because I hate horror films. I cannot stand jump scares and the like, but I love reading them. I love reading them and
Ah,
telling them. It's like when it's a movie, you have no control over it, whereas when you are reading it, you are
that's
making things up
true.
in your own head, so you can adapt, I'd say.
Yes, you can dose the level of gore. I mean, I don't like gratuitous violence. I don't like films like Chainsaw Massacre, that kind of thing. I actually, I once went to the cinema on something and saw something like that, which was more violent than I expected, and I came out was sick in the car park. For me, it's more, yeah, lost souls, dark. I like vampires. I like vampires and werewolves, but they're not too real. When it gets too real, I don't like it. When it's probable that,
Yeah,
you know,
that's
that this could be happening in your own house, that somebody could break in and do something awful. That doesn't appeal to me at all.
yeah. Yeah, violence is not the essence of the fear instinct that we try to address through the
No,
story.
no, it's suspense and mystery, and often quite often revenge or poetic justice in
Yeah,
the
or it could be,
stories.
outwitting a horrible creature that wants to do you harm,
Yes,
winning over it not by brute force, but by using your wits. I think that's the most
yes.
attractive element to it.
This is more
I think this is
encouraging.
why most people like, many people, I mean, the majority of people enjoy a good vampire story or a good witch story. And um,
It has to have a good
we've,
ending somehow.
we've been through this earlier. It's kind of let me find the word, a simulation to what could happen, whereas you're looking at it through a safe lens.
Yes. I
And it's,
also prefer to portray witches as wise women rather than wicked. I don't think any of my stories has got a witch in where the witch is somebody wicked. Even the Baba Yaga, um, which I might tell that story in a minute. Of where I like, even when traditionally things may be a bit more gruesome, I like to turn them around. I like to put in a bit of a kind of a feminist angle to make sure that people get a good education, and that the women are not just tied to princes because their foot was the right size, or and that witches are women. And of course, we're fighting against hundreds of years of prejudice against wise women who were midwives and herbalists. And there's been so much bad press for witches since at least the 17th century, and burning of women alive. They need a better deal, witches do.
We've got a friend here, we've got Amna, who in her interview pointed out, I had never thought of it that way, that women are the only majority that's been oppressed. Really, we're not a minority still, right? We have been oppressed, obviously, and in parts of the world still are, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Patriarchy is very much a thing still, and it harms both women as much as it does men, really.
Yes, of course, everybody.
And all those stories, the folk tales that come from even a few decades back, sometimes they're so horrible. You can clearly see the position, the status of a woman in society, or the lack of it, I should say. And in order to tell tales like that nowadays, because we tell stories to transform society, really, this is the whole point.
Absolutely.
We want to create the society we would like to be there. There are so many things you need to change in those stories. And
Stories
of course,
and songs are the best way of conveying messages. People remember.
Yeah.
People remember the messages, often because you have the device of repeats and things in, and special little phrases, so that they stay in your mind. I mean, before there was writing, of course, people had to remember all the stories, and they were repeated orally, and there would be key phrases and things. But music is also a huge influence on culture. More than books, because it's much more high profile. People are more impressed by. I mean, I worked for years and years in the music industry in England as a broker and doing marketing, and people are always like, "Oh, really impressed. Did you meet so and so?" And but yeah, but that was just my job. There's nothing really interesting. And then working in literature has been far more rewarding. Working in the music industry was actually pretty ghastly, apart from performing. But working on the administrative side, it's really dog eat dog and not very friendly. Whereas between translators and publishers, etc., in the literary world, it's far more the idea of making sure the art gets out there.
Yeah, well, back to the topic of women and how they were presented, there are things a storyteller can do. What you do with witches is excellent, because you portray them as the women that were not entirely incorporated in society, and thus, because of being different, they were like exorcised or presented as the villain. And then there are things you can do, like I think I've mentioned this before. Keith Rogers does this when he tells a tale where a king promises half of his kingdom and his daughter's hand in marriage in a normal tale. He says, "and the right to ask my daughter in marriage."
Right. Yes.
This is totally different. It changes the whole thing.
Yeah,
the
so
whole plot.
you can really just with a few words change the phrasing, change the idea behind it. I mean, I hate anybody being given away in a story.
I choose my tales very carefully, because sometimes you find diamonds even in those dark times for women. And when you have a female protagonist, the main character is a woman that uses her wits to come over difficult situations and reach the happy ending, or when this is my personal favorite, when there is a balance between powers. This is very hard to find, but it is there in some stories.
Yes, I much prefer there to be. I mean, one of my stories, which is the Jack-o'-lantern coach, which is a Transylvanian Cinderella, and the prince is not keen at all on the idea of having to choose a woman, because they're all pink and fluffy and smell like marshmallows. And then Fatalilia, who is this young girl, who, as usual, she's been orphaned. But as Granny Ghastly, as you know, is one of my alter egos, is the fairy godmother. So when she comes along, she makes the ball dress from moss and ink cap for the bodice and things like that. There's a nice bit of moss there. It was really lush. I know that the dog had done a bit of a wee on it, but I used it anyway because it was been such a waste. And when she gets to the ball and the prince is really bored and he sees her coming in, so this is something really different. And he takes her hand and he said, "Oh," it says to himself, "Oh, she smells of undergrowth, and is that, yes, a hint of dog wee." So they in the end, when they get married, he has a little troupe of dancing dogs that he's teaching to dance. And there's not a glass slipper, but it's a black ribbon, and the dogs have to come along and smell the women to see if they smell like the ribbon instead of fitting the shoe. And in the end they get married, and they start breeding bats. And well, it was a little bit of an accident because they've got some new blood in from up the road at Castle Dracula. So they got a couple of bites, and well, you can still see them in their box at the opera now. Sort of the idea of Granny, of course, is an undetermined age. I talk about the 15th century as, you know, doing things when I was young. And
I love Granny. I love Granny. But before, okay, I'm so into hearing a tale right now, Simona, but I shouldn't be selfish. Before I ask for a story, is there anything you would like to ask?
I was thinking about the comedy inside these stories, and I was thinking that it's really fun how you can create these kind of characters. Even just now that we've met, you gave us some sort of little performances of the characters that you insert in your stories, and they're really funny and comic in a not in a mocking way, but in a real way that you see the truth of what's happening, and you see that it's a real person, and you show the comedy of, for example, how we ourselves behave in certain situations. And I was just thinking, how do you go and create these kind of characters to put inside your stories? And are you influenced, for example, by comedians, or do you like comedy? Do you mix it with your stories?
I do like comedy. One of my oldest friends is a stand-up comedian, a musician, who's way into his 70s now, Earl Oaken. I've known him since I was 17. But the characters, when I step into Granny, because Granny's got her own costume, which was made by a friend of mine who's a costume maker, and she put it together she came round with a big bag of fabrics and said, just take out everything that you like. So I picked out, and all these little pieces of, because she collects old costumes. She's got a costume museum, in fact, and she collects old costumes. So when theatres are selling off costumes, she'll go in there and she'll buy it. So there's like small pieces of costumes. Some of them are up to 200 years old, these little pieces of embroidery and beading. And with Granny's costume, it's just a basic shift, and then she could take all these pieces, and without having to snip them up, just sewed them on, because I want it to be a patchwork of memories, to which I add as well. And then I can kind of also take a story from a piece of the costume. And Granny's hats, they started out a little bit more so with a little veil and stuff, and they've got a bit more crazy as she's gone along. She's developed. But I step into Granny, and then I just am Granny, because Granny says things that I wouldn't say. She can be much ruder and much more honest. I mean, in the Jack-o'-lantern coach, talk about the prince having lost his mother at birth, because well, you know, in those days
they wouldn't allow midwives. No, not if there was nobility. It was some obstetrician who didn't believe in washing his hands because they hadn't invented germs yet in those days. So the prying fingers of a filthy obstetrician meant the end of Prince Verkolak's mother.
As I talk about things I wouldn't talk about as me. And of course, Granny's got her boyfriend,
Leonard Le Bisclavret, who was a werewolf.
Right.
Ooh.
But he sometimes appears in the background, or I'll just say,
Leonard, what is it? Put your own collar on, I'll bed down in a minute and give you a walk.
There's one year we were doing, I think it was for must have been for New Year, and I was
making soul cakes with Granny, with one special ingredient, and that's the real soul. Because I got these burglars, you see, they come round the back of the farm, and I could hear them climbing up my apple orchard ladder. And Leonard had already gone out because the door was open, and I could hear him dealing with the second one while the one was coming up the ladder with things you can't just say to a werewolf. Drop it, Leonard, drop it. And then this burglar, he was trying to get in through the window. It was a bit too small, really, but I made it stretch so he fitted through. And I opened the top of the barrel, and he was just hanging there by his shoelaces just for a while. So I snipped the shoelace and plop into the salt barrel he went. And I put the lid on and I sat on it. And then there was a bit of struggling, but then after a while it got quiet. And I got the cream jug off the shelf. And then all of a sudden, out of a knot hole, I could see this little wispy thing coming up. So quick as a flash, I put the jug over it and then put a little cover over it. And that is the secret ingredient for real soul cakes.
I bet they taste great.
What's better than witch cakes? Because witch cakes is made from cinders, fat and wee. They used to be made round April time to put by the door to keep witches away. Well, people's going to offer me a cup of tea and a witch biscuit. I don't think I'd be coming round in a hurry.
Say, Rosalind, how did you come up with Granny's name?
I don't know. I don't remember.
This is Granny Ghastly.
Of course, it's spelled Garstleigh.
So Lee is a meadow, and Ghast just means horrible. So it's kind of put together from it's a logical put together, but evidently but my friends call me Hilda May.
And those two names, Hilda is my grandmother, and May was my great-grandmother.
Okay. It's like the ancestor women in your family line, I see. Nice. I was thinking that when you enter this persona, that she tells things you wouldn't, it must be so liberating, because these things are obviously inside your mind already, but because of social pressure or, manners.
Yes, and things that people don't want to hear a middle-aged woman saying. if it's an old woman, like I think like Jasper Carrot said, it was great being old. You can wear tartan slippers with zips outside and nobody will say anything.
You stop caring about social norms, that's it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So the closest resemblance, the closest analogy I can think of entering a different personality would be a puppeteer. Only in your case, you're not holding a puppet, you become.
Yes, I become. Actually, in September, I'm organising a creative writing course with a colleague of mine who's a poet from Antwerp, here in France, and that will be for people to write a small performance piece for another voice inside them. And we're doing this at the Costume Museum, so they will have access to hats and props and full costumes if they want to. to bring out another voice like my granny and Ruby Ramsbottom.
Sounds therapeutic, really, because you have the permission to allow things to come out that have been suppressed in a
Absolutely.
way, right? I wish I could take part in that.
Well, it's bilingual, English and Dutch.
But it is in person, right?
It's in person, yeah,
Yeah.
in the Costume Museum here in the middle of the country. So it will be 5 days, and people will go away with performance text, short performance text in both languages, English and Dutch. So it'll just be kind of like 10-minute things, real flash fiction, trying to just some like a short. Everybody's doing shorts things on TikTok, and people's span of attention is slightly lower these days. I mean, it's all like that, isn't it? But I must say that I enjoyed in 3 years ago, I think I came over to the none of us is in the UK, went over to the UK to do do a little Halloween tour with Jason, and that was the first time Granny had been on stage as a full person,
Legs and all.
and that was quite a different. I mean, I've done a lot of theatre work. I was at singing, and also mostly singing. I had a quartet where we did shows, like I did an Irish show, and there were little links in between the songs to explain a little bit what's going on as we were doing it in France and singing in English. But there, all of a sudden, Granny was from head to toe live, and you have to perform in a quite different way from on screen like this. And it was fascinating for me to be there in costume and with my pipe, because Granny's got a pipe. You don't actually see her smoking it, but she's got a pipe. And seeing people in their 60s and 70s in an audience, and really their eyes wide, just like a little kid, and you can go really quite close to them. And do you know what I said? And people are really react differently. And then you've got to involve your whole body. Whereas online, I mean, I've done shows where I've had no trousers on. I actually did Frankenstein, because I cut Frankenstein down to an hour and a half as a performance piece. And I did that. It was so hot that day that I did it in my bathroom. I was wearing a 1920s black silk dress, candles behind me and everything. But what you couldn't see was the dress was rolled up to my waist, and I had a wet towel over my knees, and my feet were in a basin of cold water.
Luckily, Zoom enabled us to do things like that. Yeah, that people wouldn't.
Yes, pajamas from here down.
And Rosalind, this may be a very strange question, but I didn't know you were not in the UK and that you actually lived in France. And now I'm really interested in finding out the landscape of storytelling in France, and also because when I think of the UK and culture and literature in, for example, in the Victorian era, there's a lot of gothic and
Yeah.
macabre, and when I think of France, I don't have the same feeling. There's a lot of course, revolution, and it's different. I don't know, the feeling is different. So I was wondering,
Yes.
how is it to be in France? I don't know exactly where you are in France, so I cannot imagine if you're in the north or
I'm in the
in the sun.
southwest. I'm in the southwest. I'm about an hour and a half from Toulouse, about 2 hours from Spain, in Gascony, in the little town of Condom.
So, like, oh, I think
I
think
bet they
I've
did
been
that
there.
on purpose. They did that on purpose to tamper with English. I'm sure.
But I mean, it's like the history. Well, the history then of Gascony is a little bit more castle-like. If you're in the
Oh
south of
yes,
France,
absolutely.
castle-like wars of religions with.
There are more chateau, really castles, but more chateau here in this department than anywhere else in France. This is why a lot of English people come over here to get married. In the Gers is actually the name of the department, Gers, which if you pronounce it as a Gersois, you pronounce the S. Other people don't, because it's at the end of the word. The culture here is very much duck and Armagnac. So I've done shows here, but I've done a lot of, I conducted a choir for 10 years, and that was, we did a lot of Christmas concerts, and that went really well. And we sang in about 11 languages, I think, including the local language of Gascon or Occitanie. But as far as doing shows, it's kind of different. The culture is it's very rural here, which is why I do nearly everything online. But this year I've started working with another performer who's actually my partner and his alter ego. So we work as Granny and Emil Polyakov, who is actually dead, but in fact, he started a museum in his house, because part of his house is an old bakery, and he started a museum to somebody who never existed. So he's invented all sorts of certificates on the walls and photographs, because he's a photographer, that he's kind of manipulated so that he's actually in it himself in a vintage background, and he builds puppet theatres, and it's all very fantastical. And this year we started telling stories together in French. So the first one we did is The 10th Life of Monsieur Chat, which we wrote together, but wrote it in English. And I did it during a show with Jason as a solo performance. And then I translated it into French as a piece for two voices. And then we wrote together directly a piece for two voices for Halloween for these two characters. So we've just started booking dates in for storytelling in French, but it's something that's quite new. People are not very familiar with it. But at Halloween, what we did, we decorated the display window of the shop, and Eve, my partner, he downloaded loads of photographs of Highgate Cemetery, of probably angels and some of these big fantastic tombs with a piano and a dog and things like that. And he does model trains. Doesn't collect stamps, but he does do model trains. So he cut them all out and then backed them all with cardboard and kind of made perspective by curving things and cutting out the archways and putting things behind and lighting it all up. And I, with AI, made a little image of the two little children, because it's about two little children who run away from their evil uncle and aunt on Halloween, and then they meet up with their poisoned parents. And we did the show inside the window with all little fairy lights around it and cobwebs and stuff, and this lit sort of Halloween cemetery town thing underneath, and the ventilation grills at the bottom of the window, which was how they ventilated the cakes in the old days, before there was any kind of electrical stuff. That's where we put the speakers. So we were mic'd up and the sound just came out there, and we had the audience just in the street. We closed the street down. We asked the permission to close the street at both ends. And then it was only it was about 40 people anyway, all standing, the big ones standing, the little ones just sitting in the street listening to the story. And it really worked. So that was our first tryout. So we decided we're going to start doing storytelling evenings at the local brewery, for instance. So we see how it takes off. Anyway, the reactions from that night were all very positive, from the children, who really sat there quietly, and the adults as well. So something fairly new, as I said. I'm hoping we can actually, Eva's building us, converting a puppet theatre into a very small theatre, so we can just sit inside it with drop down scenery, and eventually there will be moving parts to it, and very sort of Victorian phantasmagorical sort of, I don't know, he fiddles around with stuff, he mends old record players and things like that, so there will be lighting and stuff like that. That's evolving. So I don't know if that answers your question as to what it's like here.
Yeah, absolutely. Because France, it's not. I don't think I've ever met a storyteller from France in years and years of telling stories. So it's
Okay.
really interesting to know about the also the landscape of storytelling in France. Very interesting.
Well, that was near Toulouse, and where I am in Condom in the Gers, as I said, it's very rural, and most shows tend to be there's a local group that puts a show on once a year, and there's 100 costumes on stage, and it's all like from one thing to another like that, and the sound's really terrible, and the things that project don't fit quite onto the screen, and a man in his 70s with a bare chest, wearing just a pair of red ladies' tights and a bunch of grapes in front.
I'd like to look at that, I think.
That was a 2-hour show.
Well, I have heard of some French storytellers of a previous generation, really, because some Greek storytellers seem to have found a mentor there. I've heard of Henri Gougaud, he's also a writer. And there's another lady whose name now escapes me, but these are people, well, they're not old, but I mean, they are of a previous generation. And actual storytelling, like what we have, the same concept that we have in our minds when we say the word storytelling. So there must be some kind of it still going on, but not on a large scale, obviously.
Maybe more around Paris, I don't know. I mean, we did that show near Toulouse. I think there's probably more scope for us there than more little theatres. Don't know, we're really exploring at the moment to try and find settle ourselves in to be able to do that on a regular basis. It's what I like best.
Of course. It's what we like as well, Simona. So, do you think we could have a little story now? Or a long story, whatever. A story. Could we have a story, please, Rosalind?
Otis had lost an eye. He didn't remember when he'd last had it, but it had been hanging by a thread for a while. Then one morning when he woke up, he had only one eye to open. It was odd. He had to turn right round to see what was on the other side, where his other eye used to be. Rosa noticed it when she came home from school. She looked in the bed and under the pillow. She looked under the bed and all around the room, even in the bin. She lifted the carpet and found 2 coins, a sock that matched the one her mother had just made into a hand puppet, and a startled woodlouse which scuttled off down a crack in the floorboards. But Otis's eye was nowhere to be seen. As Rosa searched, Otis looked on with his one remaining eye. It was a proper teddy bear's eye, brown and glassy, with a black pupil in the middle. Eventually, Rosa gave up and went to ask her mother if perhaps she had a spare eye. Well, her mother didn't think there were any spare eyes, but there might be something in the button and bead basket they could use instead. The basket was made from crocheted seagrass with a little crocheted button to hold it shut, and it had first belonged to Rosa's mother's mother's mother. It was full of treasures and memories. Whenever a piece of clothing was too worn out to be mended or sent to the charity shop, then the buttons were snipped off and put in the basket. If a necklace broke and the beads went pinging and bouncing all over the place, then they were collected up and popped into the basket too. This had been going on for almost 100 years, so the basket was quite full. Rosa took Otis and the basket out into the garden and set them down on a blanket on the lawn. She rummaged through the buttons and beads, turning them over and inspecting each one carefully. They were all shapes and sizes and every colour and hue. There were a lot of buttons made from plastic. Shirt buttons, coat buttons, cardigan buttons with animals and clowns' faces, and in the shape of boats, stars and strawberries. There were plain flat buttons, and there were domed fabric-covered buttons from ladies' dresses and jackets. There were metal buttons, some from Rosa's great-granddad's Air Force greatcoat. There were buttons made from mother of pearl, from great big ones, almost like an oyster shell, right down to teeny-weeny ones for babies' dresses. And there were some funny little black buttons held together with a piece of thread that Mummy said came from a pair of shoes back in a time when you needed a special hook to do them up. Rosa held them up one by one for Otis to see. Otis looked with his good eye and his head on one side. And some of the buttons looked like fun, but he couldn't imagine you could see very well through them. Rosa turned her attention to the beads. There were plastic beads, glass beads with little swirly flowers inside, in another colour glass, and there were beads that Rosa had made at school for Mother's Day, winding strips of pictures cut from magazines and soaked in glue, round and round a pencil. Otis admired these very much and thought Rosa was very clever, but he didn't think they'd be very good for looking through. Then there were pottery beads from different parts of the world. Rosa found one from China. It was cream with Chinese characters written on it in blue. She held it in the place where Otis' other eye had been. The funny thing was, he didn't see Rosa through it. All of a sudden, Otis could see a garden filled with blue plum trees in blossom, an ornamental pond full of blue fish, and in the distance, a blue girl in a long blue cheongsam leaning over a little blue bridge. All the while, the tiny blue characters scrolled up in front of the scene as the story unfolded. It was all very pretty, but Otis thought he might get fed up with everything being blue. And besides, Rosa hadn't taught him to read and write Chinese yet. He could barely write his own name. Well, he could write his name barely, which meant just dipping a paw into mud or chocolate spread or something similar and making a print. He shook his head and Rosa dropped the bead back in the basket. And she found a yellow and striped bead from Africa. She held it up to Otis's face to try. Now Otis could see a wide, grassy plain with animals grazing peacefully under the hot sun. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a pack of fierce dog-like animals appeared and started to chase the grazing animals. It was all very exciting, but rather alarming, and Otis didn't really want to see what happened when the animals doing the chasing caught up with the ones being chased. No, that wouldn't do. The next thing Rosa found was a toggle from someone's old duffel coat. No, Otis didn't even want to try that. It was the wrong shape, and what's more, it was made from horn, so it had actually belonged to someone else before, who must have been very attached to it, and he had an idea that they hadn't said they didn't want it any longer. Rosa rummaged around some more, then looked up and held out her hand for Otis to see what she had found. It was an acorn. "What about this?" she asked. "It's about the right size and it's brown." Otis looked at the acorn with his one bear's eye and shrugged. Rosa held it in place for him. Otis looked back at her with his one bear's eye and his new acorn eye. What he could see now was lots of leaves and a patch of blue sky with clouds in it. He started to feel giddy, because what the acorn eye was seeing was evidently a long way off the ground. A bee word passed with bulging pollen sacs.
"Busy, busy, busy, no time to stop,"
it buzzed. Then a couple of birds flew by. One landed on Otis's branch, making it jump up and down. With the other eye, he could still see Rosa, who was sitting quite still. He tried not looking with his bear's eye and only seeing through the acorn eye. Now there was a red squirrel. It was leaning up really close and reaching out with its little paw. Otis drew his head back in surprise. The squirrel gave a start and hurriedly moved away. Otis looked at Rosa and shook his head. No, that wasn't going to work either. So what now? They had to find something else. In the meantime, Rosa had found an old marble that belonged to her granddad, a blood alley with veins of red through the white marble. Otis was impressed. A horror eye. He could scare all the snooty dolls with that. Rosa held it in place for him, but as soon as Otis looked through it, he saw another marble coming straight at him, an Aggie. He blinked just as it hit him with a smack. No, thank you. With an eye like that, he would lose his own marbles in no time. Near the bottom of the basket there were some eyes, a little packet of self-adhesive goggly eyes. Otis didn't much like the idea. He thought he would look silly, but Rosa laughed and said they could just try one out. So she took an eye out of the packet, peeled off the backing and stuck it to Otis's face. It was very small, and when Rosa picked him up and shook him gently, the whole world seemed to go round and round, and Otis thought he might be sick. Rosa took the eye off again. He was right. It did look silly. Well, what about that? Rosa saw that Otis was looking at a hagstone. Now, hagstone is a stone that's been rolling around on the seabed until the water and sand have worn a hole right through it. It has magical properties. This one still had a bit of string attached where someone had been wearing it round their neck. Rosa held it up for Otis to look through. And there on the other side, he could see a seashore. There were gulls wheeling overhead in a muscle grey sky, and an orange sun was setting behind the dunes. All along the shore, Otis could see white horses, and mounted on their backs were strange folk, tall and slender, with long fair hair and all dressed in green. They were riding to meet the white horses of the tide, which was coming in fast. As Otis looked, he saw the water rise over his stone, and in an instant he was being swirled away over the sand, colliding with other pebbles and shells, and out to sea while the horses' hooves pounded around him and churned the water into foam. Otis gasped, and Rosa took the stone away and put it back in the basket. Then right at the bottom of the box, Rosa spotted something shiny. It was a wonderful crystal bead. It was multifaceted like a diamond and Rosa thought it would give Otis a rather swish look, something between bling and steampunk. Otis wasn't sure, but it seemed to be the last resort for the moment. He sat patiently while Rosa took a needle and some button thread and sewed the bead into the place where his lost eye used to be. She did it very carefully so as not to hurt Otis, and Otis kept very still while she was doing it so as not to disturb Rosa, who had her tongue between her teeth and might bite it if he said, "Ow!" Once the crystal bead was in place, Otis tried looking through it. It didn't work like the other eye, and it didn't work like the other beads or buttons. What Otis could see now was lots of small versions of what he could see with his good eye. Some of the images were the right way up, and some of them were upside down. When Rosa put her face up to his, Otis could see it many times over, upside down and right way up, and all very small. It was rather confusing. The sun was shining brightly, and Otis could see the sunbeams splitting up into lots of little pieces of colour, red, yellow, blue, a bit like a kaleidoscope and a bit like a rainbow. Rosa set Otis down on the blanket while she went on looking in the basket. He watched a ladybird climbing up a dandelion stalk. The ladybird looked back at him. Lots of ladybirds looked back at him, all tiny, some of them the right way up and some of them upside down, and all waving their antennae at him. Then the ladybird reached the top of the dandelion and flew away, and Otis watched the ones flying upside down with great interest. It was quite fascinating. Now Otis wasn't sure which was better, one bear's eye and the crystal bead, or just the bear's eye. He could always choose to close one or the other when he wanted to change the way he saw the world, but right now he was feeling a bit tired with all this looking. Rosa said she had a pirate's eye patch on a piece of elastic that he could borrow. At supper, when the family was seated around the table, Rosa's mother saw Otis in his eye patch and said he looked very dashing and distinguished. "Guess what I found in the tumble dryer, though? I kept hearing a tink, tink, tink kind of noise. Here." And out of her pocket she fetched something small and brown and shiny. It was Otis's lost eye. "I'll sew it back on for him after dinner," she promised. Otis breathed a sigh of relief. It had all been very interesting, but he thought that what he would like best was to have two bears' eyes again.
Wonderful story, Rosalind. It's
Thank you.
brilliant. Is it one of your stories?
Yes, it is. Yes. Yeah.
Did-
I wrote that because I've got a friend who has got two small children, so I wrote a couple of stories for them. It's Rosa and Terence, and there's another couple of stories that go with that. I don't know if there's any audience. I once tried to advertise a children's story show, and it didn't sell. But maybe I should try again.
So I was wondering, when you tell this story to kids, do you play with them? Do you have them imagine how the bear will see the world, for example?
Well, the only person I've ever told it to is these two little children.
Okay. Yeah, because you normally address adult audience, obviously.
Yeah, I do, yes. And I don't know. There might be a child audience here in France, but then, of course, have to do it in French. No, the only time I performed live in France was the 5 dates I did with Jason for Halloween.
So in how many languages do you tell, Rosalind? That's English, French, Dutch.
I don't tell in Dutch at the moment. I mean, I do speak Dutch fluently, but as far as storytelling is concerned, for the moment, it's just English and French. Nice. I'm learning Arabic at the moment.
Ooh.
I was doing Russian. I did 4 years of Russian at school, and I thought I'd pick that up because my daughter's got a Russian-speaking neighbour who's a refugee. But I've been promising myself to learn Arabic for years and years. So I'm on Duolingo doing Arabic now. So English first, Dutch is my second language, then French, then Russian. No, I can't even say that Arabic. Yeah, I must speak basic German and British Sign Language. I did a couple of courses in British Sign Language.
Okay, here's some motivation for you. In 2027, there will be the 4th International Storytelling Festival in Marrakesh. Organized by the World Storytelling Cafe. So you have 2 years ahead of you.
Okay. To get my foot in the door.
To be able to tell in Arabic by then. Not that you have to. You can always tell in French. Of course, it's the first...
It will be a very short story, I'm sure. 2 years, well, maybe.
Their main foreign language is French for the moment, but it's turning right now. I think there is a change. Maybe English will take over. That remains to be seen. So you said that other than Granny, there was another alter ego you use in stories.
Yes, there's Ruby Ramsbottom, who was a widow. Yes. Would you like to hear something from Ruby?
Sure, yeah.
I know it's not really very hygienic or ecological, but I do like those moist toilet wipes. Things have come on a lot since I were in Nipper. School toilets were outside and freezing they were. They were all tiled in brown tiles all down the walls to facilitate wiping down or discourage finger painting. And they had those spring-loaded toilet roll holders that only relinquished 2 sheets at a time. And it were glassy paper. I mean, shiny bog roll. Whose good idea was that? Shiny does not equate with absorbent. It were the Betamax of bum comfort. That's my little bog roll rant.
Funny. Does she also have her own clothes, etc.?
Does she have her own what?
Her own clothes, her own costume.
She's got her own glasses. She's got her own glasses, a piece of tape in the middle. I've got several pairs of glasses. Granny's got her own glasses as well. Granny's got great big ones. I had to have those made for the stage, so they're multifocal. Ruby's got an old pair of mine, which I just converted with a piece of tape. Can I say something else? Because there's this, well, I were in Asda the other day, picking up a Frey Bentos steak and kidney pie and a kind of Hello Kitty pasta. And there was this chunky lass in front of me in the queue, pushing a kiddie in a pushchair. Oh, the little one was crying and he spat out its dummy. And this lass, she bent over to pick up its dummy, sticking her Brazilian butt lift in my face. She picked up the dummy and she sucked off the dirt and she stuck it back into the little one's mouth. And as she turned round and I saw, she was wearing pajamas and sliders. I mean, have they got no time to get dressed these days, young women? Are they too busy putting on their Manchester slap? But she turned around, she looked at me, and she got eyelashes like a palm frond and lips like a saddle sore fanny.
That's hilarious. So, do you actually have these experiences you use in her telling?
Yeah, kind of half, yeah. Yeah, because last time I went to England, I was just amazed to see the amount of women standing at the queue, not properly dressed, but with lashes and Botox lips, and very young girls. I was horrified to see outside a shop some kind of ruffians, little girls hanging around together, and they looked no more than 12 to me. I may be wrong, but all in false eyelashes, and one of them had already definitely the lips. I don't know. Are they going to regret this later on? Well, I look in the mirror in the morning and I go, oh God, I need a facelift. And then you go, smile, smile. And that's all you need.
That's from
Keep a smile on your face.
It's true. Okay, there might be a lot. We'll need to figure this out, but could we please also have the story of the White Hunt?
Yes,
Yay.
absolutely. Yeah, the Wild Hunt doesn't have a particular day, but it seems to be mostly operative around Halloween through to January. And this is one that I wrote. It's called The White Boar. John Doe, you are a heathen and a pig, shouted his wife from the doorstep. She was dressed in her Sunday best with little white gloves, a silly little hat and a hymn book. John turned his back on her and trudged off in the direction of the woods with his 2 dogs and his gun broken over his arm. It was the same every Sunday now, and his wife had become increasingly annoying as she pleaded with him to go to church with her. Neither of them was getting any younger, and the priest had been talking about the afterlife and the reward or punishment that awaited them in the hereafter. A heathen. Yes, John Posthumous Doe was well aware that he was a heathen. He hadn't always known, but last year on her deathbed, his mother had become by turns befuddled, confused, and unexpectedly lucid. In among her ramblings was a confession that only John had heard, which after piecing together he had been loath to pass on to his wife, or worse still, the priest. First of all, she had spoken of his father. John had always been given to believe he had died before he was born, that it had been a whirlwind wartime romance, a hurried ceremony in his father's town, a brief night of conjugal bliss, and then off to the front from which he never returned, leaving his mother, like many others, a young widow. That story had now been supplanted by a Gothic horror story, vague in the details, about being pursued and caught by something terrible she had encountered in the woods while picking blackberries. The big bad wolf, he supposed. And he, John, was the issue of that encounter. His mother had made mention of herbs and potions, of throwing herself off the churchyard wall, of doing everything she could to escape the inevitable, but John had been born healthy and strong at his grandmother's house here in the village. The second revelation was that John had never been christened. Well, he'd made it this far without being splashed with holy water, and he was not about to go through the embarrassment now in front of the whole village. And if that meant he was damned for being unbaptized, then he might as well be damned for hunting and drinking on a Sunday. May as well be hanged for a sheep as for a lamb. No more suffering interminable sermons from that new overzealous priest. No more sitting stiffly next to his annoying wife on a hard pew, shifting from buttock to relieve the ache. No more avoiding the priest's eye when he spoke to the excesses of alcohol and profaning the Sabbath. As for being a pig, well, he ate too much, drank too much, and was not nice to his wife. Theirs had been a shotgun wedding, and then, as soon as the honeymoon was over, Joan had suffered a miscarriage and had never produced any children since. John resented this. He felt he'd been cheated of his youth and forced to buckle down to a married life for which he was not ready. And for what? He could have the pick of the girls in the village. He could have sown his wild oats as far as the neighbouring tap. In fact, he did so regardless, but fortunately, none of them had ever sprouted. Now John and Joan tolerated each other. At least Joan tolerated John and his unpleasant ways, and John made Joan's life miserable. So here he was, out in the woods on a Sunday morning with nothing but the birds for company. Well, he felt his position was enviable. He was sure many of his neighbours secretly wished they could be there with him, with a hip flask and a sausage to keep up his strength. And he always brought home something for the pot, which hung in the shed all week and then served as Sunday lunch, his wife guiltily lifting the lid when she came back from church and sniffing the delicious aroma wafting into the kitchen. And you never knew. Maybe he would get lucky and spot the great white boar that supposedly dwelt in the cool green depths of the wood. Now, that would be a feather in his cap. A few hunters had spotted it from afar, and many had found traces, tufts of white bristles in the gorse, the typical rounded slots showing the mark of the dew claws and the soft humus. So it was with a light heart and a cheery step that John Doe set out. "Come on, Nico, come on, Dandy," called John. "Rabbits!" The two dogs bounded ahead, delighted to be out and about on a glorious morning like this with the prospect of a chase. They reached the fringe of young birches and passed from the bright sunlight into the dappled wood, where the rat-a-tat-tat of a woodpecker bounced off the trunks, and the song of a finch was mirrored by an echo better than that of the little parish church. It wasn't long before John spotted the flash of a little white tail. He aimed and fired. Within seconds, Dandy was off and back at his side with the limp rabbit. He stuffed it into his satchel. He went on walking quietly and stealthily deeper into the woods. At length he stopped and sat on a fallen tree to enjoy the peace and quiet, sipping from his flask and cutting slices from the sausage with his little horn-handled knife. The dogs snuffled around nearby, wagging their tails and digging together. John took a hefty swig and got to his feet. He called the dogs to heel, and they plunged deeper and deeper into the woods. Presently it became lighter. They were approaching a clearing. There was something bigger close by. He could hear it moving. He crept stealthily forward, almost holding his breath in excitement. Through the holly bushes he could see something large and white. Now he was sure he could hear breathing and the soft sound of something, perhaps hooves, scraping at the ground. He turned and signalled to the dogs to keep silent, and they padded noiselessly to his side, following his lead. The white thing moved, and afraid of letting this chance slip and the boar taking to its heels, John crouched, aimed, and pulled the trigger. There was a crack, then a groaning exhalation of breath and a soft thud. He jumped to his feet and ran towards where the great white thing was lying. What a tale this would be to tell his fellow huntsmen. This would show them it paid to hunt on a Sunday when everyone else is at mass. He hurried through the bushes to the clearing to claim his prize. A little rush basket lay turned over on the moss, with berries and mushrooms tumbling out. A bunch of wood anemones lay scattered among the grass. John checked his pace and approached with an awful premonition. A white ribbon fluttered in the brambles. There was a little black buckled shoe upside down in the middle of a fairy ring, and framed with tangles of yellow hair, all caught up in the branches of a sloe bush like sunbeams and crowned with thorns. A little white face stared unseeing at John. a small purple stain of blackberry juice at the corner of the mouth, which hung open in surprise. A bright line of red was being painted from the dark circle in the lovely white forehead to the lovely chin, which dripped onto the bodice of the lovely white dress. Drip, drip, drip. Tick, 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 boomed John's watch, echoing through the hushed wood as he stood motionless before the tableau. He ran. By the time he came back with a spade, nature had begun its work. The blood was congealing and flies had already laid their tiny off-white eggs in the nostrils and mouth. The flowers had wilted and the berries had been eaten by the birds. Something had gnawed at one of the lovely white hands. John retched, gathering up the mushrooms and putting them in his satchel. He began to dig around a young holly bush until he had uprooted it. Laying it aside, he continued to dig until there was a deep hollow, big enough to take the white horror snugly, curled up with its knees to its chin and its arms around its legs. He retrieved the ribbon from the bush, placed it with the lost shoe on top of the thing, then replaced the holly bush, gurgling at the sight of a dimmed and drying eye peering at him accusingly from between the roots. What the hell was she doing there in the woods on a Sunday when everyone was at mass? What was he doing there on a Sunday? The eye inquired. He stilled the silent voice with a spadeful of earth and worked quickly, filling in around the bush, shivering convulsively until finally his prize was hidden entirely. The bush now stood raised on a little hummock, but once he'd scattered some leaves and moss around the stem and kicked away any remaining loose earth, you might be excused for thinking a boar had been truffling there. The dogs whined and cowered. John reached out to stroke and calm them. Their lips curled back from their teeth as they recoiled from his touch. Then they ran into the woods. Just as John was standing back, wiping the cold sweat from his brow, the church bells rang, as if pealing for the lovely white girl beneath the holly bush. The end of mass. He had to work quickly to get back to the house with the spade and return it to its place before Joan got back. He was home just in time. Joan scolded him for not accompanying her to church and was surprised to find him quiet and contrite. He promised to come next Sunday. She looked in his satchel and was delighted to find not only a fat rabbit, but also some nice wild mushrooms for lunch. She set about cleaning them, and when they were served with garlic and parsley, she was surprised to see the lack of relish with which John ate them. The dogs were still not back after supper. John had slept after lunch and hit the bottle directly he woke up. He also hit his wife, and she suggested he might be drinking too much. He saw the same look of fear in her eyes as he had seen in the dog's eyes, and it made him uneasy. He put on his jacket and went outside to call Nico and Dandy. The moon was rising, and the wind way up high was catching at a long white cloud, making it look like a ribbon. John shuddered. He turned up his collar against the cold. There was a rumbling in the distance. He put his head down and strode towards the woods, calling the dogs by name. Dandy, Nico. The rumbling grew louder, and a flash of lightning lit up the sky. The clouds seemed to be massing together, boiling and rolling, bruised and purple, the colour of blackberry juice. He reached the cover of the woods and plunged into the trees. Overhead, through the canopy of leaves, he could now make out strange shapes in the clouds, twisting and turning, forming and reforming. Here's something that reared like a horse's head with a flowing mane. There's something that bore a resemblance to the moor of a gigantic hound stretched beyond the bounds of possibility. Faintly in the distance, he heard barking. The dogs, they must be lost in the wood. Hail started falling, big, fat stones which bounced and ricocheted all around him, stinging as they hit his face and hands. He covered his head with his jacket and ran, crouching low, calling the dogs' names. Dandy, Nico! Dandy, Nico! There was a massive thunderclap, a sizzling bolt of forked lightning, and the crash of something heavy hitting the ground. A tree. Several trees? Suddenly, there was a rushing noise from way in front of him, the distant, insistent clatter of horses' hooves, the doleful baying of hounds, and another indistinct sound like that of a great host approaching. And as it approached, the melee of sound split into a myriad of voices of every pitch, from resounding bass to piping descant, harsh and sweet, rasping and fluting, calling, shouting, laughing, taunting, urging each other on. Now he turned and ran in the opposite direction. There was a sound of a horn being wound. Ba-ba, ba-ba, ba-ba. As he rushed headlong through the bushes, John's coat snagged on a sloe and he struggled out of it to get free. He tripped over a branch and almost fell, losing a shoe. Without stopping to retrieve it, he moved on, desperately staggering from hollow to hump, wending his way through a thicket of undergrowth, splashing through the boggy patch, thick with reeds. There went his other shoe, sucked and swallowed by the mud. Now dressed only in his leather breeches and his white shirt, he passing a holly bush on a little raised tussock. He ran on, keeping close to the ground, so close that he could almost touch the earth with his snout. Crashing through the undergrowth, he tossed aside loose branches and stirred up the leaves with his tusks. A sharp thorn raked across his flank, leaving a line of blood, vividly scarlet against the white bristles. He looked over his shoulder. The wild hunt was in hot pursuit of him, on horseback and on foot. In that brief glance, he saw things more ghastly than he could ever have imagined. Some tall, some short, some grossly fat or painfully thin, bald as an egg or with locks trailing behind like seaweed, and of all colours, red, white, black, madder and heliotrope, emerald and ochre, bunt umber and parchment, silver and gold, solid and fluid, shadow and shade, transparent and translucent. On they came apace, galumphing and gliding, skittering and sliding. The horn sounded again, closer this time. John stole another look to the rear and saw the ghastly cavalcade in all its glory, with a pack of slavering black hounds to the fore, amongst which, with a shock of recognition, he spotted Dandy and Nico, their eyes afire and their teeth bared. Following just behind came the vanguard of wraiths and demons, boggarts and bogies. And leading the hunt was a young woman on a white horse with neither saddle nor bridle. She was barefoot and dressed all in white, a crown of berries and thorns pressed onto her white brow, and a trickle of blood running down her white forehead and onto her white cheek. A white ribbon and tiny, tiny white wooden anemones were braided into her long yellow hair. Again, the mottled horn with the traced silver mouthpiece was lifted to her lips, smiling. Ba-ba, ba-ba, ba-ba. Then it dropped to her side. She began to chant. Then all around, to the aft and to the fore, to the left and to the right, on the ground and in the air, the elvish archers, the trolls with their spears, and the fairy folk with their darts and daggers, the unforgiven dead with their blurred, faded faces and sharp nails, the unbaptized with their big eyes and their lassos twined together from old man's beard, ivy and umbilical cords, took up that chant.
Kill the pig, the pig, the pig, kill the pig, the pig, 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 pig.
Poor pig. You know, one of the dogs, Nico, was a Greek dog, obviously.
Oh, could well be. The names Nico and Doggy and Dandy come from a character that's associated with the Wild Hunt, who was a priest who did something really ghastly. Can't remember right now offhand. They were his dogs, and he was condemned to join the Wild Hunt with his dogs forever. A full moon rising overhead shines through the curtains onto my bed. Pictures crowd into my head, and suddenly the world is red. The moon lights the night world up brighter than day, and I'm out through the window and bounding away, down on all fours without any delay, my pale skin replaced by a thick pelt of grey. I lift up my head and my voice and I bray, I howl with a hunger I haste to allay. Running through mists and running through rain, scenting the city and all it contains, feeling the weird of the wolf as it strains to be rid of this body, the form that constrains. Leaving my nightdress a rag in the mud, my claws and my teeth erupt, lusting for blood. Up from the darkness my true being rears, the call of my kind echoes loud in my ears, down through the ages and over the years, captured in stories of primeval fears. The full moon is hanging now, high overhead. Oh, there's nothing more thrilling than instilling dread. I've a raw, gnawing hunger to kill and be fed, and I'm thirsty for blood from the hot, hardly dead. Here's an unsteady drinker. Oh, what a boon! I rip off his coat and his shirt and he swoons. Then I tear out his throat by the light of the moon, and I leave his warm windpipe upon the ground strewn. I eat of his flesh to my will, as I feast on this solitary sad man whose fate is at least at last to be licked by a lady, if a beast. Now I see a glow flicker and flare in the east, a cockcrow is heralding morning's pale light, and an end to my sweet sanguine night of delight. So I throw back my head for one very last wail. As I stand up erect and I lose my grey tail, my teeth are no longer as long as they were. My skin becomes pale and I'm losing my fur. Now naked and wending my way through the town, retrieving my tattered and muddy nightgown, I climb through the window and back into bed. Oh, why should my hands be so horribly red? Convincing myself it was only a sheep, I lick my wet lips and I go back to sleep.
That was wonderful.
It was a she-wolf.
Yes, of course.
So it should be. I don't know. Is there a term for female werewolf? Because of course, werewolf, where it comes from vir, the Latin word for men.
Yes.
Is there a term?
I don't know, because they are rare. There's a 18th or 19th century poem which features a female werewolf. A man comes in and says he's fought a werewolf, and in fact it's his wife. But yeah, normally they're men. I don't even know what a female wolf is called, to be honest. I suppose it's a vixen. I suppose it's a vixen. We can always look it up, can't we?
Oh, we'll just come up with a were she-wolf term or something.
Yeah, she-wolf.
Something that will be
It's just
easy
called a
for
she-wolf. It's just called a she-wolf.
Interesting. Well, Rosalind, that was wonderful. We had really a lovely, lovely time today
good, I'm
chatting.
glad.